Welcome to my new YouTube channel, Storm Heathen RPG, where we hope we can get on with discussing all things to do with the hobby of role-playing games and fantasy role-playing, tabletop role-playing, live role-playing if we can get the time. I'll do that as well. Yes, I'm a proper weirdo, not just a minor weirdo. Right, so start with history of the game. How can I start? It all starts with Dungeons and Dragons, really. Well, it all starts with wargaming, but it all starts for us with Dungeons and Dragons. David Arnson and Gary Gygax wanted to be heroes and wanted to wander through a world like they'd read in their books by Tolkien and Moorcock and Howard and Hubbard. So they take the rules for Chainmail, which was an old wargaming rule set, and they pull it to pieces and put it back together in new ways, and bang, give the world Dungeons and Dragons. They persuade a little known wargaming company called TSR to publish it, and America has role-playing games. Us here in England, we don't get them for a while yet. 1974 sees the release of Dungeons and Dragons First Edition. The rules were clunky, basic. Man, were they basic. There was no way to talk to anyone. You had a charisma stat, but no way of using it. It was as good as it was going to be, given its origins. Now everyone will say that role-playing starts there. It doesn't. There's plenty of examples of fantasy role-playing that go back further than that. My particular favourite is the 1920s in New York. Apparently, the rich and well-to-do in the 1920s New York would go around playing a game basically a bit like one we know today as Assassin, which is where they would hunt down their friends and kill them. Not really, obviously. They would walk up and, when they got the drop on the person, say, "You're dead," therefore assassinating them. That's live role-playing. That's role-playing. Sounds fun though. Anyway, back to the history of what we know as role-playing. So, 1974 sees the release of Dungeons and Dragons, DnD as us in the hobby call it. It also sees the first computer-based role-playing game, as some enterprising Dungeons and Dragons fan in a university in America uses the university's mainframe, and we're talking about tons of equipment here, and memory tape rather than hard drives, to basically make Dungeons and Dragons as a type-in computer game. No graphics, it's all words. And thus is born the first RPG computer game. Same year as the pen and paper version. I was quite surprised to find that out, but apparently it's true. Between 74 and 77, there are quite a few role-playing games that are released. Most of them we never got here in England. Most of the people in America never got them because it was a small industry to start with. It was very niche and it was very kind of cottage industry-ish, and a lot of them were just direct copies of Dungeons and Dragons, so they didn't get anywhere. In 75, Tunnels and Trolls was released. This, most people say back in the day, was Dungeons and Dragons' big competitor. It wasn't really. Dungeons and Dragons was fun to play. Tunnels and Trolls was a bit of a slog. I remember playing it once and thinking, I thought role-playing was supposed to be fun, not boring maths. Having said that, a lot of role-playing games are just maths, interspersed with brief cheers as you've killed whatever monster it is. Point in fact is, in 1977, TSR releases Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, AD&D. The idea was, role-playing had taken off by this point, and maybe, just maybe, your players would actually want to talk to the innkeeper and try and get information out of him. But there's no rules for that in D&D. There is in AD&D. There's rules for everything. And it's all run by numbers. So if you're not good at maths, this is not the game for you. I mean, when they tried to explain to me, and I did play D&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons a couple of times, when the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons players, the older role players as they were back then, I guess that's what I am now, but never mind. The older role players, back when, tried to explain to me that your armour class went down, and the lower the number, the better it was. But to hit something, you had to roll higher on a 20-sided dice. I was like, how does that work then? And they went, oh, THACO. And I was like, oh goody, look, acronyms that I have no idea what they mean. So I'll get to some of them. THACO means to hit armour class 0, by the way, and it's just the weirdest set of maths ever. And thankfully, the people who published D&D went, that's stupid, let's not do that again, and came up with a better idea. Other acronyms that you'll want to know about: DM, GM, Dungeon Master, Games Master. They're kind of interchangeable, except Dungeons and Dragons kind of copyrighted Dungeon Master. So if you're a Dungeon Master, you're probably running a fantasy game and you're probably running Dungeons and Dragons. Every other game, apart from select few, you're a Games Master, a GM. There are games where you're a storyteller. That sounds really posh. And other things. Some games are have quite imaginative names for the bloke that sits at the end of the table making up the rest of the world. Could be a woman, of course. I'm not sexist. Could be a woman GM. There are quite a few of them out there, and they're just as good as the rest of us. After all you need is an imagination and a will to slog your guts out for hours on end trying to please your players, and they just don't turn up. It's great. Right, back to the history. During the late 70s, some games that people remember, or some games that are still about, were released. You got AD&D for a start, which went on and on and on and on and on, but thankfully eventually became 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, which we'll get to. And then you have Traveller, which is the big science fiction game that came out at that time. Traveller was unique in a lot of ways. It's still going now. You can still buy and play Traveller. I'm not quite sure whether it's on 5th edition or 7th edition or something. It's not one of the games I actually play or own. But back then I did play a game of Traveller. Intricately crafting my character over 3.5 hours, rolling my life path, which is the last thing you do during character creation, which explains how you became a traveller and how you enrolled in the Space Corps or whatever it was called. And the possibility of death is in there in the life path. And thankfully my games master at the time went, oh, you've rolled up the fact you've died, let's just ignore that and carry on. But apparently some people were like, oh, you've spent 3 hours making up a character and you've rolled that you've died during life path. You're dead, make up a new character. Yeah. I'm quite sure that Traveller put off quite a lot of people that would be role players today, just by the fact that they got sat down by their friends who were really passionate about this science fiction game, spent ages working the maths out, had it all explained to them, and I know what it's like explaining a role-playing game to a new uninitiated person. Most of the time they get this glassy 40-yard stare and they're not understanding half of it, and then you actually get them to play the game and they enjoy themselves. But they've had this 40-yard glassy-eyed stare for 2 hours as you explained all the maths to them, and they've diligently written down and rolled dice like you've told them to, and then you announce them, your character's dead. And you haven't even started playing yet. I mean, genius idea. Not. Moving on. In 1981 comes out a classic game that you can still buy today. Horror fans love it. It's the be-all and end-all of proper horror games. It's the game where you can carry a gun if you want. It won't do you any good unless you're going to commit suicide with it or shoot your friend. Because it won't hurt the enemy and it won't hurt the monsters. It's Call of Cthulhu, based on H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. It's horrible. It's got tentacled things in the darkness and zombies that just don't die. And it's not the fact that you're going to get eaten by the Great Cthulhu. It's the fact that before you get eaten by the Great Cthulhu, you're going to go insane and actually work for the Great Cthulhu first. And you don't want that, because as a player character, that's you, you're supposed to be defeating the Great Cthulhu. The next important game for people in Britain, and that is still around, that came out in that time, is Paranoia. It's by West End Games. Paranoia deals with the idea of a nuclear war, and you are the survivor. Well, you're the descendants of the survivors that made it to a nuclear bunker, and the nuclear bunker is run by an all-encompassing, all-intelligent computer. Unfortunately, it's been hundreds, maybe thousands of years since you all got locked in. Well, your ancestors got locked in, and the computer's suffered several cascade failures and glitches over that time and has gone quite insane. On the flip side, the human race in this Vault has become sterile, so you propagate through cloning. So there's not just you, there's you and your 5 clones. But you only get to use one of your clones when the current you dies. Which is really easy in Paranoia, because if you don't laugh at the entertainment officer's joke, he can shoot you for treason. If you're going to the wrong coloured corridor for what overalls you're wearing, you can be shot for a security clearance brief. If you fail to turn up to your annual inspection by the computer, by the way, the computer can give you about 50 annual inspections, it's insane, it can't remember if it has. You can be shot. You can turn up and the computer can decide that you're surplus to requirements and vaporise you in the room for no apparent reason. The first game of Paranoia I actually played, the GM made us act out stuff. We had to run down the street to the lamppost at the end of the street, and the last person to come back got vaporised. It's a brilliant game. My friend Ian has bought me a copy, which I'm diligently failing to read at the moment because there's other things I have to do, but I do intend to get it read, and I do intend to run it again because it's hilarious. You'll never run a campaign of Paranoia. One-shot games are all you'll ever get, and if some of your players make it to the end of that 4 hours with more than 1 clone still alive, they've done brilliantly. We're going to skip forwards to the 90s now. I mean, in the 80s you had the release of Star Trek role-playing games, Star Wars role-playing games, endless amounts of superhero role-playing games. You also got some of my favourites, Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, Rifts, all of which were major things in role-playing, but not as big as the one we're getting to. I mean, Cyberpunk redefined what it was like to play a science fiction game. There's no happy endings in Cyberpunk. In 91, White Wolf Studios, sorry, get it right, released Vampire the Masquerade. Vampire the Masquerade changed everything. Before Vampire the Masquerade, the idea of role-playing games, mainly, was to stab up the monster, steal as much treasure as possible and become the most powerful thing you could be. It was all based on numbers, and the role-playing aspect of it was how well you stabbed up the monster. With Vampire the Masquerade, the idea that the 6, 8, 3 of you sitting around the table, or however many it is, are playing a game, transformed into you are telling a story. It gave role-playing the idea that GMs and players are working together to make a story that you're all enjoying being part of, and that you all have a vested interest in. It changed how games were played and why they were played. It's a brilliant game. Some of the other things it did was attract quite a lot of people that I don't want to speak to the role-playing community. And there are some right people that play Vampire. I dare say that to some of them I'm the same kind of person. On the upside, because Vampire the Masquerade dealt with being a vampire and playing the monster, which was unusual in role-playing games in the extreme, it was cool. It attracted women to role-playing, which before that point, you know, if you went to a role-playing convention and saw a girl, that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Nowadays, we're split pretty evenly 50-50, which is good. It makes sitting at a role-playing table a lot more enjoyable, for me personally. The amount of times you get to sit down with 6 guys that have never had a girlfriend in their lives, and they spend the entire game trying to seduce everything. And you're like, all I want you to do is cross the bridge and kill the dragon. Can you stop trying to chat up the 1-2 75-year-old barmaid, please? Right, Vampire brought other things. It was the best-selling game for a couple of years. It knocked D&D off the top spot, and it, like I say, it changed how role-playing games were written, played, and thought about. As a spin-off, it gave us Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It gave us True Blood. It gave us nearly every vampire movie you can think. It's nearly every vampire series that the Americans made in the last 10 years, 15 years. So you can blame Vampire for things like Twilight as well, unfortunately. in 1993, a small Scottish games company releases a little known game called Slay Industries. I'd heard about it because, as well as being mad on Vampire, I was really into my cyberpunk. And Slay Industries was billed as the British version of cyberpunk. Boy, was that an understatement. We don't do dark by half, do we, here in Britain? I mean, Warhammer 40,000 is not just the largest science fiction universe in print, it's by far the darkest. Slay Industries, well, it tried to outdo Warhammer 40,000 in a lot of ways. It's a cyberpunk game in that it's you versus the corporation. The problem is, you work for the corporation owns everything. And the more you know about the corporation, the more likely it is that one of the corporate operatives, your friend, will shoot you in the head for it, or make you disappear, or feed you to a cannibal, or let you get killed by a group of serial killers. Slay Industries is dark, really dark. It's brilliant. It's in reprint. You can buy the first edition at the moment in hardback. Get it if you can. Apparently there's rumours there's a second edition coming out soon. Right, so where do we go from there? During the 90s you get Werewolf and Mage from White Wolf Studios, which again helped to redefine how role-playing games were made and played. And you get all the other really good role-playing games that we have to do today. There's the Star Wars stuff from Wizards of the Coast, and then subsequently from Fantasy Flight Games, who also published the Warhammer 40,000 role-playing games, which are mint. The next Warhammer 40,000 game is by Ulysses Spiel of North America, and it's called Wrath and Glory. I'm waiting for it to come out here in England with eager arms. But what happened in the 90s and early 2000s changed role-playing again. TSR were undergoing problems financially, and Wizards of the Coast, who gave the world the wonderful Magic the Gathering card game, which I've never played and don't intend to, so don't ask me about it, bought TSR, and with it Dungeons and Dragons and all the intellectual property that came with it. And they released 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. And with it, they gave the role-playing community the open game license, which, even though Wizards and Hasbro, who now own them, have tried to get rid of, still exists today. The open game license was basically, here's the set of rules, not the setting, just the rules. And you can use the rules to make any other game you like and any other setting you like, as long as it doesn't encroach on the bits that we've got copyrighted. D20 exploded. There was games for everything. If you wanted a game where you played little old ladies going down the shops for a pint of milk while being attacked by zombies, there was probably a game for it. And then there was gems, like the Mercenaries Guide from AEG, which I've still got. And even though it's really out of date and doesn't work very well with the game I now run, has some brilliant ideas in it that I keep putting in my games. So it was swings and roundabouts. But Hasbro took over Wizards of the Coast, and they didn't like the fact that they were giving away stuff for free. So they said, we need another edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's got to target a younger audience. We need to bring in younger role players. Well, from my experience, younger role players are brought in by older role players. Because older role players can actually afford to fork out the 40 or 50 quid for a book, whereas your teenager, generally, if he wants that much money, he's got to ask his dad anyway. Or rob a little old lady. Anyway. 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons was their answer, and 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, I bought the Player's Guide and the GM's Guide in the hope that it was the answer to my prayers and that it would be a fix for all the problems that 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons had. It wasn't. It was a video game in book form. It was awful. If I wanted a video game of Dungeons and Dragons, I'd have just brought Neverwinter Nights. Quite frankly, if you want a video game, role-playing game, you buy Neverwinter Nights or one of the multitude other ones, Elder Scrolls, all the other ones that D&D has influenced over the years. You don't buy a 40 quid book and then another 40 quid book because someone's got to run the game, and finally another 40 quid book, in other words 120 quid's worth of books, just so you can run a video game. No. Funnily enough, D&D 4th edition didn't sell. And D20 system was sold to a company called Piaggio, who gave us Pathfinder. Pathfinder is everything Dungeons & Dragons should have been. It's what I now run as a fantasy system. All of the open game license stuff, with a little bit of modification, works with Pathfinder. And you only need one book to run it. It's brilliant. Wizards of the Coast have gone on to now release Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. If you're part of the hobby already, you've probably heard of Critical Role, Matthew Mercer and the rest of them. They run 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons to run Critical Role. Before it was Pathfinder, now it's 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. From what I've seen and the little I've played, because I do own a copy now, 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons does work. It is a role-playing game that any role player can play. It's a little bit more simple than 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons, which is no bad thing. Right, so how does all of this change the way we see things, or the way the world sees things? Well, role-playing is a small subculture. Yeah, we're geeks, but there are hundreds of types of geeks. There's online gamers, there's cosplayers, there's furries for some reason. Role-playing has influenced quite a lot though. With the initial Dungeons & Dragons and the initial first role-playing games on computer, from that, nearly every first-person shooter, nearly every role-playing game, well, definitely every role-playing game on PC and console, all owe their existence to the publishing of Dungeons & Dragons. Call of Duty does too. You play a role, so therefore you're role-playing. It wouldn't exist without Dungeons & Dragons. Video games influence a lot of things. It's the new big media. It's still not quite as big as Hollywood movies yet. So have we influenced them? Have role players and role playing influenced how Hollywood works? Steven Spielberg would say yes. He played Dungeons & Dragons on the set of E.T. He's still a role player now. Joss Whedon of Buffy gave you Firefly if you're a sci-fi fan. For more general populace, most of you have heard of the Avengers films. The first two were directed by Joss Whedon, an avid Dungeons & Dragons player. Although currently, by his own admission, he's a bit too busy to play regularly. I wonder why. Still in the Marvel Universe, director Jon Favreau, also Happy, Tony Stark's ever-faithful security operative. Yeah, he's a Dungeons & Dragons player. He stated that role-playing and Dungeons & Dragons gave him an understanding of storytelling that was unique and allowed him to bring it to the screen. On the small screen. How many people like The Simpsons or Futurama? Ever wonder why Gary Gygax turns up in some episodes? Yep, that's because Matt Groening is a D&D player. Small screen again, Star Trek. Will Wheaton, Star Trek, Big Bang Theory. In Big Bang Theory he's letting his geek flag fly and pretty much is being just himself. Will Wheaton runs his own role-playing channel on YouTube and is also on Twitch and various other online medias, and you can catch him on Will Wheaton's Tabletop. Staying with Star Trek, Carl Urban, who plays the new Bones McCoy in the new version of Star Trek, and also played Dredd in the amazing Dredd movie. Dredd movie that actually was proper to Judge Dredd. He plays D&D, or role-playing at least. So does Vin Diesel. The whole of Chronicles of Riddick. That's pretty much him being his character. So they say. The Chronicles of Riddick movie had Judi Dench in it. Role-playing legend says that Vin Diesel made all the cast members play Dungeons & Dragons. This seems like it might actually be true because rumours are now saying that Judi Dench DMs for her grandchildren and helps run Dungeons & Dragons for them. Lastly, we'll go into music. Tom Morello, Rage Against the Machine, Audio Slave, now Prophets of Rage, role player. Although he doesn't strike me as a D&D player. More cyberpunk, I'm thinking. But we'll see. Marilyn Manson, professional weirdo. Well, He may as well add one more flag to his weird flag. He's one of us as well. And finally, for my friend Griff, who is my most avid, enthusiastic guy that's basically promoting me everywhere he can get his little electronic fingers. He loves his pro wrestling. Chris Jericho is rumoured to be a role player. It's not surprising really, pro wrestlers are brilliant at playing over the top, larger than life characters. That's what they're supposed to do for their job, isn't it? Oh no, sorry, all that's supposed to be real, isn't it? I forgot. Right. Coming to the end. There's a lot of independent games out there now, thanks to downloadable PDFs and print-on-demand services like Drive-Thru RPG. Every man and his dog can publish a role-playing game if he really wants to. If he has got the drive to actually sit there night after night, slogging it out, writing rules, having it play-tested, accepting the criticism, and so on and so forth, eventually they can publish it. If they're lucky, they'll make money. Hopefully, I can get my hands on as many of them as possible. Not writers, but the games. Because I want to review as many independent and small games as possible. It's not difficult to find anything you want about Dungeons and Dragons and Vampire the Masquerade. In role-playing circles, they're what's popular, they're what's fashionable. But just like everything else in life, if you dig beneath the surface a little bit, there are some gems. Slaying Mysteries is one. There are others. Victoriana, although you can't buy it anymore because it's out of print, and Cubicle 7 is notorious for publishing things back to front all the time. It's still a brilliant game. I want to review these in a way that explains to you, the audience, how the game works and why you should buy it, or get a copy if you can. And then the second half of the video, or the second video that matches to that, will be how to play it. I won't tell you how to play your character, I'll tell you how the mechanics work, what dice you're going to need, how to build a character, how to interact with the other characters and what the game world means. So that you can watch the video about the game and hopefully be able to sit at a table with a bunch of role players for the first time and actually not be completely lost when they start talking about the setting and the game and the terminology and the little abbreviations that all hardened role players speak like a second language, because we do, and I know we do. So that's goodbye from me.